Hello, church family. It's 2 Minute Tuesday. As I've shared in the past, when I was growing up, my family observed an annual celebration of St. Nicholas Day. Every year in December, we'd gather at a friend's house for a weekend, and we'd spend the weekend eating good food and playing games and singing Dutch songs. And then we would all gather in the living room to wait for St. Nick. That's right, St. Nick would actually show up. Now, all the kids had been primed ahead of time. We knew that St. Nick carried a big bag of presents and there was one for every kid. But there were always a few little kids who hadn't been through this before. It was their first St. Nick's party, and so they didn't know exactly what to expect. So that when St. Nick burst through the door, a 7-foot tall bearded stranger, you can imagine how those kids' anticipation gave way to absolute terror. Now, the Bible is full of references to a special event, a special day that the Old Testament prophets called the Day of the Lord. It's the day that God is expected to show up in person and finally make life right, which seems like cause for anticipation and celebration, but that's not actually the way the Old Testament prophets talk about it. In Amos, we read, "Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Why do you long for the day of the Lord? That day will be darkness, not light." Now, in Christian circles, we call the day of the Lord Judgment Day, and thanks to Old Testament books like Amos and New Testament books like Revelation, the day of the Lord or Judgment Day is not a day that we look forward to. But in 2 Corinthians 6, the Apostle Paul says a couple of surprising things. First, he says the day of the Lord, predicted by the prophets, has already come. Second, that day is not condemnation, but salvation. Paul writes, "I urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. For he says, in the time of my favor I heard you, and in the day of salvation I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation." In the person of Jesus Christ, in other words, God has already come to earth and started making life right. And at the cross of Jesus Christ, God satisfied the judgment requirement of Judgment Day, so that there's nothing left, no condemnation left for us, only salvation, only reconciliation. And at Christ's return, which is promised, God will reckon with the remaining evil on earth and reconcile all things to himself. So Paul gives us both a reassurance in this passage, but also an urgent reminder. He says Judgment Day doesn't have to be scary. You don't have to spend your life worrying about Judgment Day coming. In Christ, there is this reckoning, this reconciliation without any condemnation. But that being said, we shouldn't wait for some future opportunity. We shouldn't put things off until the end. The time to be reconciled with God is right now. Take the moment now, because none of us know how many moments we have left. The day is here.